Welcome on this Areopa webinar. I'm Bert Beek. I'm your host for today, and this topic is about how to generate the REST APIs from Kiota. And this is the 109th Areopa webinar, and this is the last one from this season. And the last presenters are Simon Fischer and also Tobias Fenster, and they will introduce in a couple of minutes. And of course, some housekeeping rules. Your mic is muted, and you can post your questions on the GoToWebinar question windows, and I will pick up those questions as a moderator. After this webinar, we will post it also on YouTube in this case, and present on LinkedIn and Twitter, and so you can see also there all the recordings. And do you want to need to have what's in before ahead is how you can subscribe to the Areopa webinar newsletter, and sometimes that we will give updates on that one. Also, what I said, this is the last webinar of this season 6, and next on the 1st of September, season 7 will be opened, and it will be opened by Waldo and Tina on the subject of the Power Platform from the perspective of the BC development. Then 2 weeks later, Stefan Sosic will do a webinar on cost of poorly written AL code. Then Jose, that's the postponed webinar from 2 weeks ago on the 7 or so AI killer prompts. Then have Waldo do some performance issues on Cosmos, what you can do on it. Then 2 weeks later, then extending the backend of Business Central AI agents with Azure AI Foundry from Katerina and Artem. Then we have got 33 dev tips in 45 minutes from Milan and Luc. And the last one that we now have covered from Tina and Luc is you don't have to make test plans anymore. And of course, we are constantly looking for speakers and topics. So if you have a topic, suggest one, or you want to have a speaker, also suggest one. And before I am handing it over to Simon and Tobias on this topic on Kiota, I want to thank you for our sponsor, for NAV, for hosting this webinar. So Simon and Tobias, it's up to you.
Thank you. So welcome from my side as well. Bert, thanks a lot for the introduction. We want to talk about how you can get to auto-generated REST API clients with a tool called Kiota. We, as Luc already mentioned, that means Simon Fischer and myself. To introduce us, I am one of the GMs of 4PS in Germany and a chief engineer at Hilti, also Microsoft MVP and RD and a Docker captain on the community side. And if you want to follow along with what I'm doing, you can find my blog and my podcast on Tobias Fenster.io, and also find me on LinkedIn and Blue Sky if you wanna get in touch. Simon, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Tobias. Yeah, I'm a senior software developer at 4PS. I work together with Tobias here at 4PS in Germany. Well, almost 2 decades ago, I started with .NET development, and soon after that was CAL and then AL. And yeah, since I'm here, I love sharing what I'm working on. So I worked before with the community and Microsoft on different topics, and I'm happy to share here with you today about our work with Kiota. And of course, if you want to reach out afterwards, feel free to ping me on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, GitHub, or via my blog. And yeah, I'm looking forward to discuss the work with you.
Thanks a lot. So what are we going to discuss today? First of all, I'm going to do a bit of an introduction and show you the typical use of Kiota. I think as we are a bit late this time, I keep that a bit shorter to try and end at the proposed time. Then Simon will dive into Kiota clients with BC and AL, and in the end we have a bit of ask for help that you can help us out on. So to introduce you Kiota, what is the typical challenge? And the challenge is you have just another API that you need to integrate. Fortunately, many of those APIs are now, many of the integrations that we build are now API-based, so we no longer have to deal with the CSV files or file-based integration, and I think that's a great step forward. And the handling of those API-based integrations in AL definitely has been improved. Looking back a few years or even months, that definitely was not as good as it is now. So yeah, we are in a better place than we used to be. Anyone who still wants to do the same things in CAL and file-based, let me just say I don't agree with you. I'm still very happy that we do it now API-based and in AL. That doesn't unfortunately change the fact that a lot of repetitive code is still necessary, where we don't have any business logic, and at the end of the day, the customer probably is not really willing to pay us for that, because it's about integrating the systems and not just writing some boilerplate code. And if you look into changing and expanding APIs, that typically requires manual maintenance. And I don't know if that's the same for you, but for us, that's also a typical scenario that the API changes because this third party makes some changes, or we decide, okay, we've now covered one functional area, now we want to cover another functional area. So that is basically something we do on a very regular basis. And again, that needs manual. What we can do as a solution is that we can use Kiota to generate clients. So the general idea of Kiota, independently of Business Central or AL, is that instead of manually creating and maintaining code, you just generate those clients using Kiota. The basic idea is that you use an OpenAPI definition to generate that client. When you have that OpenAPI definition, and we'll dive a bit into what that actually means, you throw that at Kiota, and Kiota generates the client code for you. That doesn't have to be the entire OpenAPI definition, but it can also be only a part of it. That's especially relevant if you have huge APIs. For example, if you were to integrate with Business Central, that would give you a huge API, but maybe you only just want to see customers or vendors or whatever. And then it's important to understand that with Kiota, you can also generate clients for part of the definition only. We can generate clients in different programming languages. My initial example will be C#, and you will see in a second that a lot of others are also possible, but also based on the work that Simon did, we can also integrate that with BC. So what's the example that I first want to show you? My example is that we take the BC API, the OpenAPI definition from that, throw it at Kiota, and then in the end, we have a client in C#. So that basically would be the example where we don't have a client in Business Central, but Business Central is the server side, the API side, and we generate a client in C# just to show you how Kiota currently works, how people across the industry use it at the moment. And I want to first show you how that actually looks like when we are done. For that, I will switch over to my demo VM. So what you see here is a very simple C# application, just a console application that needs a bit of setup. It needs the authentication. It needs the backend URL for BC. You can see here, this is not a cloud instance, but it also would work with a cloud instance. And then we just make a request and get the companies. We show the name of the first company. Then we have also the ID of that company. And then we also request the customers and show the display name of that customer, of the first customer. If we just run that, it builds and starts, and you can see, okay, first company is Kronos International, first customer is Swartzmeyer Furnishings. And if we go in here and open that one, I'll open this in the browser, and then we go to the customers and change the name of the first customer to something that includes Areopa, and execute the same call again, just to show you that this is indeed live. And then you should see that now the name of the first customer is Swartzmeyer Furnishings Areopa as expected. So you can see this is really very little code, very simple code. I think also very readable code. Even if you're not that familiar maybe with C# code, you access the companies, you access the customers, you read them, you have the display name, you have the name. So no fiddling around with JSON serialization, deserialization, and that kind of thing. Instead, it works more or less intuitively. How did I create that? First thing is that I used a blog post I did in the past, which is actually based on a blog post by Waldo, how you can create an OpenAPI definition. And this is basically a big PowerShell command using the BC container helper to create such a container and automatically build up the OpenAPI definition based on that. You can take a look at the details if you want to figure out how that works. Then I just used that file that has been generated. I installed Kiota. That is a very simple call as well. I generated the client via the Kiota VS Code extension, and then I used the client as you have now seen. So I also want to briefly walk you through that one, just to show you how easy it actually is. And for that, I will open up the Kiota extension here. Well, let me actually pull up a new window to show you how it works from scratch. So here we have Kiota, a workspace and an API Explorer. And here in the API Explorer, I can look for the file. I think I put it in the demo Areopa folder. So this would be the OpenAPI definition file in YAML here. And now you can see I have the API Explorer that shows the different APIs that we have. Of course, if you know BC, then you know you always need companies and access by company ID. And if I now expand that one, I can see the expected functions below that one. For example, the customers by ID, etc. Now I could click generate. That would generate the code for me and put it into my solution. For the sake of brevity, now I want to show you what I did. So now it also creates a JSON file that is put into the folder, and it doesn't work as expected. Why not? Okay, I don't want to spend more time on that one. You can imagine I get the same view over here. And now if I at a later moment would decide I also want to have vendors, I could just go in here and say, okay, now I also need vendors and vendors based on ID. Or for example, if I want to, for whatever reason, be really sure that I don't accidentally delete the vendors, I could say I only want to have the get and the patch, but I don't want to have the delete in my client. And then I could regenerate my client, would adjust my code, and then I can use that client. You can see generating those clients is pretty easy. You can do it pretty quickly by just using the OpenAPI. You can search through the definition in the API Explorer and select which integrations you want to use. And also, if you at a later point want to make changes, you just throw in a new OpenAPI definition if changes happen that way. Or if you just want to expand your coverage of the API, then you go in, select new functions, new entities, activate them, regenerate your client, and then you can work with it straight away. Okay, that was the very, very fast version of the intro. I hope I saved us a bit of time, Simon. But with that, I want to hand it over to you so that we can step into the next part of the story, which is Kiota clients with BC and AL.
Yeah, thank you, Tobias, for your C# example. Of course, well, we have a business-centric audience here, and if you followed the Color Cloud or BC Tech Days content, you maybe already see some things or saw some things from the Kiota implementation. But let me just reiterate some of the pain points that Tobias mentioned earlier in AL. So right now, working with JSON in AL it got better. Actually, it got better. Of course, Microsoft put some work in it, and but it's still not very user or developer friendly, and actually very error prone to work with larger data entities in JSON. And it's also a lot of repetitive work, and you need to map a lot of entities to your data structures. And so also crafting like HTTP headers or handling authentication or the message bodies for the content creation. It's often they're re-implemented each time, and based on that, very prone to errors. Yeah, it got better over time, especially since the REST client module from AJ became part of the system app. But it's still not very nice to implement a new API from scratch, right? And for example, all the screenshots you see on these slides, the one earlier and here, come all from community posts and questions regarding implementing REST APIs in Business Central. So it's not something I came up with out of the blue, but it's actual questions from the community. And so I guess you already saw when you saw the C# code, I think we all agree that it would be much nicer than instead of manually handling these JSON access and error handling, if you could just use the dot notation like in C#, or if you could spend time with the business logic instead of manually crafting or reading this, parsing JSON, and yeah, actually work on the topic to integrate an API instead of handling HTTP headers or commodities, in my opinion. And yeah, also it would be so much nicer if we can use tooling that is very, very common in other frameworks or languages and helpful in other languages. So why shouldn't we bring AL to a new level? So similar to Tobias's sample, I will also show you how to generate something with Kiota. I will take a little bit different approach, but let me just start by showing you the specification that we're going to work with, because we will come back to some of these entities. So Swagger provides an OpenAPI 3.0 sample specification and also a sample API that we can work with. Little heads up here, the API sometimes needs 1 or 2 calls to actually finish it because it's a public API and they have some caching and reverting of the data operations. So don't wonder if you see an old record, even if I updated one, it will come up in a new way after another get, for example. So this sample specification, it contains some simple entities like pet, store, and user, and each of these entities has some operations you would expect on it. For example, creating a new pet or record, or retrieving one, updating one, deleting, or create an order, show inventory information. And when I look at this specification, I already think about, hey, how do I integrate this into a product? I think, well, I probably need to check the inventory before I place an order for a pet. And before I place an order for a pet, I should also check if, well, the status of this of the selected pets are available and not already sold or pending. So I would love to just start working with the business logic instead of handling, I don't know, checking out the schematics of each entity, thrifting through the specification here in the JSON. Okay, we have a lot of paths for pet, like the put operation or the post operation, the find by status, and so on. You see in the specification, you also have all the schemas for each object, like user. We have an ID, username, first name, everything you would expect on a user record, right? Or for the pet, we have an ID, a name, photo URLs, tags, status, which is an enum. So everything is defined in here, but as of right now, we would still need to manually parse all this and like transfer the JSON somehow into our Business Central tables. So let's start by quickly use this specification. You can see it here, just the same link that I just opened in the browser. we will, instead of manually or instead of doing it via the VS Code extension, I will show you the in VS Code. So basically, we just call it for the language AL, just provide a folder name and a directory and a name. And basically, that's all that Kiota needs to start working on it. So, and in probably just a second or two, it will be done. And here we are. And before I go into the details, let me just show you what we just did, what we just created. So, and before I open this, let me copy one sample page and simplify it to the just generated folder to make it a little bit easier so that we can look up objects. So everything besides this test page was just generated by Kiota. Let me open the test page and just deploy it to my demo environment. This page is just for demonstrating real quick. So now let's launch it, and hopefully it pops up in a second here. Yeah, there we are. You see, I have on this page we have a group for pet and for some technical information. And let's just do a get for the pet with ID 999. So, all right, we have something here. We just retrieved that. Actually, I think for the 999 there was some earlier. You see that some testing had happened here, but we will see the same if we use the API here for get ID. Let's try it out for 999 and execute. So we have two variants here. That's the name is dogs. I think that's what we saw here, right? Yeah, it's 9. We have tags. So everything that you saw here, it's basically we have the response, and we just work with that. So how much work do you think this was? It shouldn't be a lot of work, right? So basically, it's just this action for the get, and actually, it's only this line. You just call client.pet and indexer function.get. And in the end, we check if it was successful. And if it was successful, I would just map all the object properties to the variables on the page. And that's basically just accessing each property like you would expect it in C# or another language. So if we look at this object, we have ID, name, tags, status, everything that you would expect. Also some other like setBody and toJSON. We will look at this later. But in the end, right now, we just need to assign these variables, and that's it, we're done. That's all we need to do for reading a response from the API. We can also do an update. Let's check if 998 is there. Let's not open. Let's do reset first and get. Oh, sorry. Click too often. 998 and get. That's not found. Let's say we create something, and we just post this. Is the debugger running? Oh, sorry. Oh, I forgot. Sorry. Let's remove this and try it again. Post. There it is. So we just created a record, and again, it was as simple as using the get from earlier, not the put action, but the post action. Basically, we just set the header. We map all the variables that we have on the page on the object. So ID, pet ID, name, pet name, and so on. And when we're done, we just say client.pet.post and pass down the object that we just created And again, when it was successful, we update the page and show the status and response content. But it's basically for the operation, just one line, configuration, another 3 lines, and yeah, mapping the object. I don't count it because it's depending on the entity. So how does this work? Let's have a look at the generated API client for that. Each API client has some variables and procedures that are the same for every generation. So we have some default configuration, we have some configuration getters and setters, we have some initialization function to pass down an authorization object, and we have a response getter and setter, which is a neat little trick that I will show you later in a bit. Besides these standard procedures, we have 3 basically getters for talking with the API, or especially talking to or selecting one of the entities like pet, store, and user. And I used the C# wording that Kiota is using for some naming. So if you ever want to compare a C# generated client with the AL one, you find more differences, like the request builder classes. I use the same naming that C# does here to make it a little bit easier. So what we're doing, we're basically returning a request builder class object here, and we just pass down the configuration that we have set on the API client. So if you set any authorization or some other configuration like the headers, we just pass that down here, and we step into this request builder. So when we look at basically the call here, like client pet post, that's client pet on the request builder class, and then we call the post function. Post just retrieves the body as a code unit of type pet, and in here, in all these operation procedures, you will always see the similar pattern. We pass down the client configuration to a generic request handler. If there is a body, we set the body. We set the method like post or put, could be get or delete, and then we handle the request. In case of a delete, we don't have any return values, but in other cases, we would transfer basically the response to the return value, again, which would be a pet object, and we can directly access everything. So this is basically all the methods look the same. In the cases where we have where the API has indexer operations, like you see here, pet ID for get, post, and delete or upload image. Kiota will generate a so-called indexer function and passes down the ID that we set on the page, pass it down to the next level, and again, we just append the ID to the URL and then do the operations like delete or get or post on this actual object. So it depends if you want to work on the pet level, on a specific pet, or on the generic one. So that's basically how all these request handler, request builder classes are built. So we use the configuration, set the method, and handle the request. If there is a response, we also process the response. So let's have a look at the what else is generated. So for each entity like pet, store, and user, we have all these request builder classes. We have it for user, we have it for store, and each of these is using data. And all the data entities are generated and put in the models category. Let's look at the pet because we worked with that one. So each model class code unit implements this interface, Kiota model class. And it basically has the set body function, which will receive the API response, a test function to type validate basically all data in the response, like which use all the getters and all the setters of the properties, and then all the getters and setters of each entity. Like we can read out the categories and we can set the categories. can read out the ID, and we can set the ID on the JSON. So it's just making it easier to work with this. So it's very the handling is very similar with this approach to the C# approach, for example. You don't need to work with the JSON manually. Just let Kiota handle what you need, what it needs to do with the JSON. There's some different handling based on the types. If it's a simple type like a string, it's easier than, for example, for status. For status, we depends if we need to work with the actual API strings and not the, for example, capitalized strings values that we use in Business Central, and so on. At the end of each model code unit, you will find these two JSON procedures. One, so if you build your own object, if you build your own pet object, for example, you could just return the current one that we set, the JSON body that is currently set on the object, or build your new one by passing down all the properties as parameters, and then it will build you a new object and return this. That's already the interesting part of, well, most of the part that is generated. Next up, I wanted to show you we are using this generic request handler here. So to avoid having too much boilerplate or duplicated code in each of the generated clients, I created a small companion app similar to what Microsoft is doing. So you saw in Tobias' example, you also saw some usings from a Kiota package. So the .NET implementation also uses a NuGet package reference, and this is similar. I put in some, for example, the references to the interfaces or some JSON helper or the config object. I put in this separate app so that this is handled at a central point. And here we also have this request handler. So the request handler has some helper functions, also some setup functions. But in the end, what are we doing? We craft a request message using the REST client module. So with all the parameters that we received here earlier with a body or the HTTP method, we craft this request message, return it, and then we just send the message, and we pass down the response back to our API client. So you remember that we passed down our client configuration, all the levels for each request builder class. So let's quickly go back to the API client. And you see here, we pass down the client here, the actual, the reference to this object that we are working with. And doing this, we are able to pass down the response to the client that we passed earlier. And that makes it possible that we directly work with the pet, for example, as a return value instead of manually processing the response. So here we have this getter and setter functions for the response. And that way we can always, from the client, validate the response, like check it, similar to get last error text or get last error call stack. We could just get the last response and check if it was successful, or check the body or header if we need to. So we can access everything, but the return value from the operation is the actual API response that we want, the entity that we want to work with. So that's basically what I have to show you in AL, but you probably also want to see how it works in C# or how you can modify it to your needs, or you already saw a pattern that you don't like and think to yourself, hey, Simon, I have a better idea of implementing this. So don't hesitate. I will show you now what you need to do if you want to make the current implementation better. I won't deep dive into Kiota because it's a huge code base. Believe me, you will need some time if you want to understand all the details. But let me just say, Kiota will take the specification and generate a generic representation, code representation of it, or like a document object model, a DOM, a generic one. And at the next step, the generic model is translated to the target language that you selected, be it C# or JavaScript or whatever you selected. It will translate this generic model to the target language, basically. And if you want to step into this, each language has a so-called refiner class. So you see it for C# a refiner, for Dart, for Go. So for each language that is supported by Kiota, you see a refiner function. And the AL refiner, basically we modify the representation a bit to AL needs, right? For example, I don't know, let's remove not supported parameters. AL doesn't support cancellation tokens. So AL doesn't support async await patterns. So we don't need cancellation tokens. We don't have a representation of this in AL. So we just remove it. Also, for example, C# knows properties like that you specify with a get set keyword, but in AL we don't have properties like this. So we have properties, object properties, but not data properties to get or set values. So what are we doing here? We check out all the properties that Kiota generated, and we translate these to getter and setter methods. So create an actual method function out of it, basically. So there are a couple of things that we are doing to the Kiota generated code. It's still, it already works, as you can see. It's still a bit work in progress. And after this is done, Kiota starts writing the actual files. This happens each type has a writer class, basically. For example, if you want to check out a code unit is basically code class declaration. That's basically what Kiota is naming this, or class declaration. We will see later on the method, code methods, code index, whatever you like. But let's take the code class declaration as an example. We will basically check if there are any namespace, or we write a namespace. We always write a namespace. It will check if there are any using directives we need to write. We check if there are any interfaces to implement. We also, and then at the end here, we start writing code unit, get an object ID, and write the short name for the object. And we write also object properties, maybe like access internal or a caption, the object properties that you know from BC. And you also write global variables, for example, the ones that you saw in the API client, like the base URL. And now we have the outline of the object, code unit, we have the properties to the variables. So now we start with the methods. And for each method, let's ignore the checks. We don't need to go into the details for a couple of minutes, but basically we write the so-called method prototype. That's basically the signature, the name, and the access modifier, like if it's internal, is it local, the method name, the parameters, the return value and return type. So it depends what we have here. So we write basically the signature of the method is written in here. We start a begin, so we encapsulate everything in between with a begin and end. And in here we have the differentiation of all the types. So for example, the serializer, so Kiota calls it the method kind serializer. That is what we saw in the two JSON methods. So let's look at these. We had two, one without parameters and one with parameters. For the one without parameters, it's easy. We just write one line of code, right? So it's just return the name of the JSON variable in our object. For the ones with parameters, it's a bit more difficult. We could have arrays, we could have code units, primitive types, and so on. So there are different cases here for, we check out each parameter. If it's a code unit, we with an array, we need to handle it differently than if it's just a simple variable. So for each type of method we are working with, we need to handle it differently. For example, we also had the getter method, for example. We go here, so all these getter, first we select the token, and if it's not there, we exit. But basically, if you write the code that we would normally write manually, let Kiota write it. So I'm betting there are still things to improve in here, but it's already a huge time saver. And speaking of time, that's basically what I wanted to show you there, because a deeper dive into Kiota would take us probably days. But it's a lot of fun adjusting these to the needs. And yeah, that's what we have basically right now and what we're working with and what I showed you. So let's quickly go back to our slides to come to our last section of this session. So we have the current status that I showed you. This is all part of a fork in the Microsoft Kiota repository. It's currently in my personal GitHub fork, but it's public. I created a README document which describes the current status and also differences from the usual Kiota processing, which will hopefully might make it a bit easier as an introduction to the huge code base. And I showed you also this companion app, the Kiota.Abstractions, with the JSON helper and the request handling. That's also public on GitHub. So feel free to check it out. And yeah, right now we basically need you. After Tech Days, I already received some feedback out of the community, because I need people who test it against their APIs. I use the ones that I know that we work with at 4PS, but there are so many different kinds of APIs out there, and I already received feedback via GitHub that with an example that didn't work in the beginning, and I also have another example that still doesn't work, or still needs to be worked on. And my goal is that we make this production ready. Right now it's in good state, but it's not yet production ready, I guess. But it already can save a lot of time. I guess you saw this. I probably bet that you never use so little time to talk to an API via AL as in this demo. And yeah, we're really looking forward to people who use this, who test it with their APIs and get more stability into it. So by providing feedback, and the goal is also that we get this merged into the Microsoft repository as quickly as possible. Also, this companion app could be part of the system application, for example. And when Microsoft sees that there is a demand out of the community, I guess it will make it a little bit easier for us to get it back into the product. And yeah, now I talked quite a bit, and I think we are basically almost at the end of our planned time slot. So now it's up to you. I looking forward to your questions. I hope it wasn't too much for the bit of time that we had. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out or ask them in the chat right now. Bert will read them if there are any. And then, yeah, looking forward to working with you guys on this. Thanks.
No, really thanks a lot, Tobias and Simon. And indeed, it is very interesting. I've got also, well, not a question, but a support from Pedro. Super interesting. Count on me to take a look and try to help you. So that's already one from this webinar, and probably I think a lot will come, because indeed it is very interesting and very fast.
Yeah.
Just one question from my side, and as you mentioned, is like generating the JSON structure and stuff like that. That's indeed also quite difficult to handle integrations. But what I also encountered is how doing integration is doing the authentication. Sometimes it's a little bit different. Does Kiota handle that also?
Well, in theory, yes. Right now, the authorization part is still work in progress, because I think you saw what Tobias, in Tobias' example, he passed on user password to Kiota, to the implementation. So as of right now, when we look at the abstractions app, you still see my screen, right?
Yeah.
There's the to-do marker in here. That's actually the next part on the implementation list. The bearer authorization support and user password. I guess next up would be then the OAuth implementation to maybe include the flow in there, but I'm not sure how much we should put in there, but there will be some authorization handling in there. So that, because that's the promise of Kiota, like making it easier. Right now, it still takes some, for public APIs, it's easy because as you saw earlier, but it still needs some work in the authorization department.
Yeah, okay. But it's really good to see that even with the JSON structure, it's quite helpful. And question from Jeffrey. So instead of doing all the groundwork when integrating with third-party APIs, we can leverage this, right?
Right. You can just use, if you have an OpenAPI specification, just feed it to Kiota and start using what it already generates.
Okay, perfectly.
Very welcome to use it.
Yeah, and indeed, and well, thank you indeed from Jeffrey. And just one question: do you have a sample repository that people can clone easily?
Yeah, good that you ask. I think so. This is the fork in my personal one on branch Kiota.AL. So if you want to run it locally, just clone this repo. And here is the Kiota.AL sample. It's also in my personal GitHub. Just check it out. It uses this pet store example. I intend to put more samples in here, depending on how well what are the FAQs basically, right? Frequently asked questions. If you have any, I will prepare an example so that we can use it more easily. Here it also has a reference to the Kiota repository fork with a branch. If you want to check out the abstractions app, that's also in my GitHub. If you want to create support for bearer authentication or whatever you have in mind, feel free. As you can imagine, it was already a lot of work, and I try to work on it whenever there's some time left. But as you can imagine, a day only has 24 hours, and there's still a lot of other things to do. But I tried.
Yeah, I can imagine. But I think that you already proven that this will really speed up also the development of the integration with third-party APIs.
Definitely.
Only with generating and then doing only some part of the code. So really interesting, and I hope indeed, same as you, that a lot of people can contribute to it. So in that case, we have it. Another question from Jeffrey. Quick question: during the demo, I noticed some code units being used. Does that imply there are part of a control add-in or .NET components? If so, are those procedures accessible and consumable directly within AL?
So we don't use any .NET references. Everything that is generated is pure AL. I'm not sure what exactly. So of course here this is all .NET, but the Kiota code, that shouldn't matter. Everything what we see here is only a warning because user is also, well, a name in BC general, right? But it is it targets cloud, so we don't have anything that makes it only usable on-prem. So feel free to to use it for cloud development. I think I still want to talk to the Kiota team actually, because I know that they don't want to put too many command line arguments like these here, like language, clean output, and so on. They don't want to put too many command line arguments on the Kiota command line tool in general. So I'm still thinking about a way how maybe with a configuration file to specify ID ranges, which to use, and so on. But I will, if you check out the repo or check the repo for updates, I will post any updates there. And of course, sometime every couple of weeks, probably when there's a major update, I will also put it on my blog and give some explanations. So if you have any ideas to improve this, feel free, reach out. I'm really looking forward. I don't blame you if you think you have a better idea, because, well, let's be honest, I'm also not a genius. I'm just trying to make my life easier by automating stuff. And if you have an idea to make it better, please reach out. I'm so looking forward to make it better for all of us.
Yeah, indeed. Thanks a lot, Simon, Tobias. And indeed, what I said before, it is really a great opportunity. Indeed, what you said, Simon, to speak your development also on. So there are no questions for it. So really, thanks a lot for your time and also spending this time also for the community. Also, thanks a lot for all the listeners, and we will put this webinar onto YouTube. This is our last webinar for this season. So here are also the links for YouTube, the newsletter, the email, and the LinkedIn. You can go there, enjoy your summer holiday, and we will go back to the 1st of September for being on the webinars. So thanks a lot and have a really great day.
Thank you, Bert, for hosting.
Thanks a lot. Take care.